All right, here with Dennis Chow, and we're going to have our first recording for Product Management Insights. I'm excited to kind of dive into, Dennis, your background, hear a little bit about the company and the product you built, and then I was fascinated by the project you put together. I'd love to do something like that myself with content marketing roadmaps and analyzing and stuff, but I can't wait to hear what you learned, from that project. So, um, let's get started with tell us a little bit so that one I know, but then so we kind of have a context. Tell us a little bit about your background, and what I'm really interested in is that while you have been in technology and a technologist, you have been in multiple industries.
Yeah.
What kind of unique perspective does being in different industries give you? Both, what do they have in common, and then what were some of the unique challenges? As you were in telecommunications, retail,
Yeah.
payments.
Yeah.
Talk about that. What was that journey?
Oh gosh. It's really funny, Chuck. Like we all like to think there's, sort of a plan in front of us, and all we're doing is just executing against the plan. I'm not ashamed to admit to you, I feel like there were random stones that you were just jumping from one opportunity to the next. But then it's when you do the reflection and you look back, that's when the serendipity happens, and you're like, oh my gosh, you can actually carve out a bit of a narrative here, right? And so, sort of, yeah, I'll tell you, sort of. Truth be told, a lot of my opportunities just been, sort of opportunistic in nature, and sort of it's the result of, sort of establishing a bit of a personality, a reputation within the organization that you're working in that really sort of is summarized as, hey, that's a person I wouldn't mind collaborating with again. Right, sort of,
Hmm.
they're accountable, they're fun to be around. They ask some good questions. We challenge each other well. Can they help? Sort of, our cause in this new organization. Yeah, and so a lot of my opportunities moving from sort of one industry to the next have really come about because of that. It's just the power of the network that you have, sort of the community that you built. Um, what I've managed to do in a look back, though, as you reflect, is really sort of carve out a profile for myself that says, hey, I'd like to fashion myself as a really strong product management practitioner. So much so to the point where, I take that classic sort of 2 by 2 matrix that a lot of hiring managers look at when you look at sort of talent. And it's like, hey, you've got domain expertise on your Y axis, you've got your craftsmanship on your X axis, and, sort of you cut that into 4 quadrants. I very much, sort of in this day and age, will identify myself as a bottom right? So I may not necessarily be strong on the domain, but you're going to pick me because you want to bring someone on board that has, sort of got that expertise in the function of, that particular craft, which, in the case we're talking about today is product management, right? So,
Hmm.
the ability to, sort of galvanize around that point and then to build up a narrative for your profile to say, hey, listen, I've seen this done in different flavors across different industries, right? There's unique distinction points, but there's also a lot of commonalities, right? And so, it's, all that to be said, Chuck. It's this idea of, at this point, in my life, it's just, yeah, how do you build good product functions? How do you build up a strong product team, and really ultimately just, help that particular organization in figuring out, sort of what the right thing is for the right customer at the right time.
Oh, absolutely. When, talking about journey, many years ago, I've been doing this for a while. I woke up one day and someone said, they said, can you do some SEO for me? This was way back in the days. And I'm like, that's not what I do.
Yeah.
But it was because I was a content guy, and my architecture and my craft led me to be an SEO. I'm actually today, like when I get into these topics, I realize that I never knew it, but I'm kind of a product manager,
Yeah.
kind of the same way because of what you're talking about. It's the what is the company trying to do?
Yeah.
How do you apply your efforts and intention to that, and then how do you manage and run a team? I mean, that
Right.
right there. I mean, those three items, the brand and the company, the product, you, and then the team. I mean, right, that's true in so many different domain expertises. So, yeah, I really like what you said there about the domain expertise can go across industries because um, I think a lot of people are like, I don't have the experience I need in that industry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So I
I mean,
mean,
how do you drink from that fire hose when you get into a new industry?
well, and I mean that's it, right? Like sort of it's having that presence of mind to, you know, to just look at that plane, to look at that graph and say, okay, where am I? Where
Mhm.
do I plot on this graph? And, sort of equally as important, in my opinion, when you're evaluating opportunities, when you're looking at sort of new roles, new organizations, it's to understand what they need, right? So there are times where, sort of, an organization may call for a product leader that, sort of just requires them to have that person be really strong on the domain side, right? You'll see a lot of job descriptions where it's like, hey, sort of familiarity in this industry or previous experience in this space, highly coveted or a strong bonus, right?
Mhm.
Sort of there's that, and you just got to be able to be comfortable in your own skin to say, look, more likely than not, I should probably not move forward with this opportunity. But if I decide to do so, I just know that the odds are stacked against you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not in a most favorable position to succeed in
Mhm.
that endeavor, but you should still do it anyways, in my opinion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You made a comment a little bit ago. I want to dive into if you do move into a new space. You talked about being the guy or person that asks the right questions.
Mm,
Talk, I'm leading you down that path. But talk a little bit about your approach, your techniques for talking to people, like all
yeah,
the stakeholders, not
yeah,
just customers, not just team, but right, how do you go about that process of, okay, everybody, I need you to tell me what is going on.
yeah, yeah. Really, really good question. I would tell you, I've been able to sort of really distill this down into sort of that classic 100-day plan. And, sort of my 100-day plan for, joining a new organization as a product leader, I do the classic, sort of 4P approach, but my P's are priorities, people, projects, and processes, right? And the 100 days, sort of I'm pretty, sort of specific about the fact that we're not counting weekends here, right? So we're counting 5-day work weeks, right? We're averaging 4 weeks a month. So we're actually talking about a 5-month period to get to 100 days, right? So, over those 5 months, what am I doing, with respect to talking to the right people, listening to the right people and the different stakeholders across the organization, understanding what the priorities historically have been, what they are today, where we think they might go going forward, understanding how projects are linked to those priorities, taking a look at how we are executing on those projects, what's sort of the broader organizational satisfaction rate for which the product development teams are executing on those projects. And then that clearly obviously dovetails into process as well, right? Sort of just looking at a lot of the discovery delivery processes that sort of the teams are engaged in and saying, hey, what are we doing? What are we happy with? What do we want to see change? What are we not doing? And what is there the opportunity to introduce into the organization, right? So coming back to your question though around the people, it's very much, within those first 100 days, it's got to be a listening tour, right? And you've got to spend that time talking to, sort of all points on the compass with respect to your feedback, right? To really get a sense of, hey, these are sort of, these are my bearings. This is the current situation. This is the lay of the land. Here are the opportunities, sort of this is where, sort of we might want to, go forward. Right. And so everybody from, and depending on sort of the role that you're in, right? Sort of as if you find yourself in more of a leadership role, an executive role, I'd say you go right up even to the board, right? If you have a chance, how do you have, the opportunity to talk to, sort of several of the board members to get their sort of, their perspective, on how they feel product development efforts have been going in the organization thus far. But sort of right from the board on down, right through to leadership, through to sort of that leadership -1 layer of management, and then sort of where appropriate, right down to the front lines. Right. I can
Yeah,
tell you, as part of my, sort of 100-day plan that I like to sort of really coach other product folks with, there's, this idea of just spending days on the front line, shadowing your sales reps, shadowing your support reps, grabbing a second headset and listening along, and in between calls having some conversations, be like, do you get that often? Is that something that
hmm
comes up regularly? What's the current messaging to respond to that? How do we look to evolve that?
yeah. No, that's great. So I love the 4 Ps, love the 100-day plan, the listening tour. I like that term. Um, so I, I'm somewhat of a technologist, so I'm gonna borrow and I'm deep in AI right now,
Sure.
trying to figure out that part of it. So that's where I'm going to say this: there's inputs and there's outputs.
Yeah.
So you've got your inputs coming in, your listening tour. You go through some type of transformational, critical thinking, creative thinking process, and we're going to get to outputs now. Now you got to go back to people and tell them what you heard, what you learned, what you found, what you think.
Yeah.
Talk about it. I'm assuming somewhere in the 100-day plan, now you have a narrative to develop.
Yeah.
How do you think? How do you think about that?
Um, I've been accused, for better or for worse, for being a guy that really hangs on to analogies as I speak. So get ready for another
Let's
analogy.
hear one.
I think about the visual of a bicycle wheel, Chuck, and I think about a hub surrounded by spokes, and I sort of think about what we do in product as being in that hub, because whether you're sales or marketing or support or customer success or finance or HR, you're all going to touch product, right? So it's that listening tour where, as a member of the hub, in those early days of joining an organization, you've got that opportunity to visit each spoke one at a time and to collect that feedback. But then again, by virtue of you're the hub, everybody's touching you, but there are spokes that may not necessarily be touching other spokes. Right. So then it's a
Mhm.
requirement, in my opinion, for, being in the hub to then provide that synthesis of all that information you've received, and then to broadcast that broadly to say, hey, listen, here is the broader picture based on contributions from everybody here, right? So that sort of your marketing colleagues and stakeholders have a chance to see what that bigger picture is, because they may not be necessarily in sync on a regular basis with your customer success folks, right? And sort of your customer success folks may not necessarily have sort of an intricate understanding of what's going on the sales side, right? But everybody's got everybody's got an opinion on the product, so they're definitely going to let the product team know, right? So I think it's part of your obligation as a member of that function to really sort of take that, synthesize it, distill it down, really bring together those core ideas, and then to broadcast that back.
Yeah. So in this listening, synthesis, hub and spoke, broadcast, the findings, is there any chance that this approach led to you creating your product, your company? What's the transition here? What was
Yeah,
the genesis? What was the aha moment where you
yeah.
said, I have to build this?
Okay, confluence of events. Um, in the depths of the pandemic, as we are all stuck at home with nothing to do but to scroll through social media, I found myself in this phase as well. And you go through sort of LinkedIn, and what are you seeing, right? You're seeing sort of post after post around playbooks, ops playbooks, revenue playbooks, customer success playbooks, sales playbooks. Sort of the epiphany hit me where it's like, how come we don't have a product management playbook? Where is a playbook for good product people, for good product leaders who, maybe you're going through the first time, or you've gone through it a couple times and you've always been left wanting, looking back a little bit unsatisfied with sort of how you've done things. And it's like, listen, sort of where is there, some guidance? And so, sort of I took it upon myself to say, hey, you know what? Like, you've got, sort of almost 2 decades of experience in this space. Why don't you just write down all the experiences you've got and what you've gone through? And so that started, sort of this, sort of journey to try to really distill, sort of the finer points of product management and how you'd go about, sort of, running a functioning product team. Right. And, everything from the things that we do on the discovery side to figure out what the right problem is, all the way through to the processes that we have on the delivery side to really, sort of bring that right solution to market. What does that all look like? And so I would tell you, the origin of LodeStone started there. And then, sort of from that, there was a chance meeting with, sort of, a brilliant technology colleague who, sort of just said, once upon a time, he said one day, listen, if you ever want to build something together, like, I would love to build something with you. We should totally do that. And so, that's how LodeStone got started. We said, listen, let's take a lot of the foundational elements that are in this playbook, and let's just toy around. Let's see if we can build something out of it from a software perspective. And I would tell you, sort of the first thing that we have with LodeStone is our roadmap storyteller, where we build out a sunburst visualization for your product roadmaps. Coming back to just, lived experiences, right? And, sort of really understanding, what does a good roadmap do? I think, sort of the roadmap needs to be understood to be this bridging document that really takes an organization's overarching strategy and connects it to the day-to-day tactical executions that the teams are doing, right? In product and engineering. So, the things that you're building, the things that you're working on, how does this roll up into the bigger picture, right? And, sort of during my time in the earlier part of my career at one of the larger, sort of enterprise organizations in Canada, I volunteered to be part of my department's employee engagement sort of task force. And so I got a deep dive into the whole world of employee engagement and sort of what factors, sort of HR teams evaluate to really determine whether a team is engaged or not. And one of the questions in these classic employee engagement surveys that stood out to me for whatever reason was this question of, I know how my day-to-day work connects to the bigger picture in the organization. And, sort of there was a whole bunch of data that supported the fact that question, along with, I think, 5 other questions, if the participant, if the survey respondent answered in the affirmative, then there was a strong correlation to them being overall a fairly highly engaged individual. And so as part of this task force, this is the stuff that we poured over, we looked at and said, how do we sort of try to move the needle? For whatever reason, that stuck with me. And sort of as I started thinking about, how do we build roadmaps? What are we looking to communicate with roadmaps? I would tell you, my subconscious mind, sort of went back to that and said, hey, listen, how are we connecting the day-to-day work to the bigger picture? Right. And so, with that, you've got that hierarchical data set, right? You say, hey, these are the features that we're working on. These are some of the themes that those features are connected to, which then in turn roll up to, hey, these are the organizational goals that we have. This is what our leadership team at the first town hall of the year said. Hey, these are, the handful of, strategic goals we want to accomplish this year. Sort of I hang on to that. And I'm like, listen, all the roadmaps we build as a product function, we're going to go tie them right back to those goals that we're talking about as an organization.
Yeah. So if we can, just for a second to make sure, in the sunburst chart, and in my mind, where I paused there for a second, I went back to your hub and spoke bicycle wheel, right?
Yeah.
It's the sunburst and a bicycle wheel. And this question, right?
Yeah.
Where does my spoke fit into everything? So where I'm going to lead with this is, why is the sunburst chart your choice of the narrative presentation? How does that work?
Yeah.
Like, Like talk about. I mean, we can all look up what it is, or we've either used them or not used them, but why does Dennis Chow
Yeah.
use the sunburst chart as his go-to?
Okay. A couple things. The first reason I'll give you is based on what I don't like to do, and then the second reason is based on what I like to do. Right.
All right,
So
love it.
the thing I don't like to do is commit timelines to our initiatives. Right. And I will push back furiously on stakeholders who ask for roadmaps with timelines. That being said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not I'm not shy of timelines. I believe there's a distinction here that needs to be made. There is a document that your product team needs to produce called a roadmap. And as I said earlier, it's that bridging document that connects your
Mm-hmm.
strategy to your tactics. There is a corresponding document called the release plan that really sets a schedule to all of those initiatives, the tactical items that you've put in your roadmap. Right? I'm not shying away from that. I think there's an accountability there on product teams to produce and update and keep their stakeholder teams regularly informed on the progress based off of the release plan. Right? So I'm making that distinction to say, hey, listen, if you want timelines, if you want dates, you're asking for a release plan. But if you want to know where we're going, what we're doing, then you're asking for a roadmap. Just don't ask me to blend the two. Right? So, sort of in an effort to really be able to make that distinction and to separate. That's sort of where the sunburst came in. The secondary reason, the thing that I like to do, um, just tell good stories, right? I think one of the core facets of being good in this function of product management is your storytelling capabilities, and it's how do you take all of this information, how do you sort of intensively review that and then come up with a narrative that's really connects these dots together, right? Where others are looking up in the sky and they're seeing a random smattering of stars, you're the one that needs to really connect them together to say, hey, look, there's a constellation here, right? And this is where we need to be looking at the world together, right? So it's that storytelling aspect. And this is what I would tell you, sort of the product. This is where LodeStone sort of really takes it beyond just the production of a sunburst chart for its users, because when you do that export, we'll export that roadmap, that sunburst chart, into a PowerPoint presentation. And what we do is we effectively deconstruct the sunburst, and we will break it down section by section, slide by slide. And so you've automatically got a collection of slides that allow you, the presenter, to progressively go through to say, hey, listen, for Q4, we're about these three goals. Let me talk to you about goal one. Within goal one, we've got these two core strategies. Strategy A now has these three features. Right now, let's move to strategy B, and so on and so forth. And so the slides are set up to sort of really display that in a nice sort of compelling fashion, giving you the additional space on the slide to add in the additional context you want. But sort of that's really the other side to it, right? Sort of building LodeStone, presenting roadmaps in this way to really equip product people with that ability to
Yeah.
craft and articulate a strong narrative.
Yeah. So that's a great overview and explanation and narrative. And you did work in a nice analogy with the stars and the constellations. So no, good work there.
Thanks.
So as you move through all of this and with LodeStone, I want to dive into a project that you put out on LinkedIn, and I was able to read a little bit about. But you decided to do 31 roadmaps in 31 days,
Yeah.
and you used the product, and you even presented in a sunburst.
Yeah.
So tell us both the genesis context, like what went through your head, why, and then why at that moment did you feel compelled to undertake? I mean, what I have to imagine was a pretty intensive, immersive period of time to do 31 roadmaps in 31 days.
Yeah. It was my own personal March Madness, sort of this past year. Really, I'll tell you, sort of where this came from was just sort of my own convictions around really wanting to give product managers and product leaders a new way to be able to look at their plans and be able to articulate, forward directions, right? And you know, these are, often repeated tropes that you hear in the world of product, right? Oh, let's get away from timelines, guys. Oh, let's move away from this sort of stuff. How do you actually do it, right? It's so easy to say, it's so hard to do, right? And I think, sort of you spend any amount of time in product management communities, you'll see a lot of these types of examples where, sort of adages are just tossed out so, effortlessly, but, sort of there's that missing, sort of instruction on how to make that leap and how to bring that theoretical into actual practice, right? And sort of, recognizing that as, sort of something that happens within the product community on a fairly often basis, but then zeroing in specifically on roadmaps to say, hey, what does this look like? Right? How do we look to do this? Building LodeStone and really sort of having the conviction and the belief that said, hey, there's a really, we've taken a lot of time and effort into making the the crafting of a new roadmap of a roadmap narrative ridiculously simple, right? We're going to take, sort of, the hierarchical data set. We're going to take the information that you have, the features, the themes, the company goals, however many layers you're looking at, sort of layering this, and we're just going to allow you to put this in and create those nested relationships to be able to show sort of that nesting. And then, we want to give you the ability to export that into, sort of the presentation format of your choice, right? So, just a core belief that this is a new way to look at it. I haven't seen, outside of people that I've directly sort of, shared this methodology with, I haven't really seen this used before. And so, sort of just from a core business standpoint, right? Sort of a bit of an awareness campaign, right? To sort of say, hey, listen, let's take 31 product managers and let's, sort of, let's put forward this bold claim to say, you give me 60 minutes of your time, I will give you a first draft of your roadmap deck. Right. And so that was the challenge. I sort of put it out to, communities that I was connected to. I sort of said, hey, listen, we're going to embark on this challenge. If you're interested in, sort of having a new version of your Q2 roadmap that perhaps you haven't thought of before and done in a way you've never looked at before, reach out. And so, actually, sort of it was a lot more than 31. I think, sort of when the final tally was done, we were actually at 46 product managers. And so, sort of we just, we stuck with the theme of 31 and 31, right? But yeah, sort of that's how it started. And, sort of that was the journey we went through, right? Just spending, sort of, one day each, every day of the month, with a different product manager and really, spending a little bit of time getting to understand their context, but then helping them sort of visualize their plans.
Yeah. So you went through the 31/46 interviews, and in your starburst, you landed on three areas: product strategy, and I'm synthesizing down,
Yeah.
prowess, and then your roadmap revelations. So, and then from there, the outer part of your starburst, and we may pull in a visual. There's your 31 lessons. So. I want to ask a question inside of each of the areas,
Sure.
but feel free to go anywhere in the area that you want, because there's things that I'm interested in specifically,
Yeah.
in narratives, and that you may say, oh, Chuck, you're missing the point. When I do this, when I do this, I do it differently. So Dennis, from that perspective, and because I'll segue it with, because I hear and agree with you, this icky feeling you get when you have to do timelines, when there's so many things going on. I don't mind a release schedule. Give me a Gantt chart all day long.
Right.
But there's so many variables going on. So how can product managers have that long-term perspective and do what's right for the product while also delivering on short-term objectives that people need to do their jobs and the work that needs to be done? Like how do you think about balancing this, with all the folks that you've talked to? Is that a common problem first?
Yeah.
How do people, like, how did the 31 roadmaps in 31 days Did it give you any insights to that?
Um, I would tell you, sort of going through, sort of 31 roadmaps. What it did was, sort of really validate, a lot of the, sort of pre-existing notions that I had had, just based on, again, my own experiences, creating and presenting roadmaps myself, but also sort of just, running, sort of teams and really coaching, product managers in building their own roadmaps. It really solidified a lot of the sort of hunches that I had. Right. And what I would tell you, um, is you know having that ability to really be on top of the day to day and the short term initiatives, but then to do that within the context of the longer term bigger picture. I would tell you that that's exactly what sort of the impetus behind the roadmap storyteller in LodeStone is all about. There's a reason why we talk about this idea of things need to roll up into bigger and bigger things, right? So it's this, sort of ability to, sort of display that all at once, but then to be able to then dive in and sequentially and logically, progressively move through them. As I'm explaining this, I'm smiling in my head. I'm smiling now because I remember times in my own life as a product manager grumbling with colleagues because our executives wanted the impossible. And what we thought what we said the impossible was give me the bigger picture, but give me all the details as well, and put that on one slide, right? And so it's like, well, what do you want, right? Like I can give you the details, or I can give you the bigger picture. How do you expect me to put that on one slide? And so I think about these events that have happened in my own history and in my own experiences, and it's like you really do see sort of with what we've built with LodeStone, sort of that manifestation of I'm going to try to tackle the impossible. You want it all on one slide? I'll give it to you all on one slide. It'll absolutely be overwhelming. When you first take a look at it, you won't know where to look. But give the presenter 30 additional seconds to then start to move sequentially, and you'll be
Mm-hmm.
hooked because you'll let them tell that story. And then by the end of it, you'll say, gosh darn it, you actually achieved the impossible. I see everything. I see the bigger picture. I see all the small details, and I see how they're connected.
It's great. So as we move into area two in the product management prowess,
Mm,
I want to segue with that was addressing the challenge of put everything on one slide.
right.
So another challenge that I think all product managers and product leaders have to face is that of resource constraint.
Yep.
Do it all with the team you have, maybe even a smaller team.
Yep.
Same problem. You got to both balance the short term product release, bug, whatever. You've got short versus long term. You have the complexity of the whole thing. Like what frameworks, what processes. Like not because yes, I know you can get somewhere with narratives and hub and spoke and relationships you've built, but tactically,
Yeah.
how do I go about addressing what I think 99% of product managers have, which is do more with less?
Yep. Yep. Um, when we were in the really early days, when we were planning out sort of LodeStone, and sort of I was spending time really thinking about, is it just going to be something that's just a small utility? Are we just building a road mapping tool that sort of is just a really focused built sort of utility for product people? Do we have an opportunity to do more? Is there sort of a larger problem space to tackle here? As I was thinking about that, two core problems or problem statements kept coming back to the top of my mind. And I would tell you, it's almost, sort of this guiding principle to sort of how we look to build out this platform on a more broader basis. The first problem space is articulated for me in the sense of there's always more things to do as a product person than there is time in the day for you to do those things. You're always going to be overloaded. The same way we are asked as product managers to prioritize amongst the seemingly endless array of opportunities, but really applying the absolutely limited resources we have. The same way we're asked to prioritize those opportunities for the company, we actually find ourselves having to prioritize our calendars to say which meetings are the most critical meetings I need to attend this week. What does that look like? The best product people I've encountered have a Sunday night exercise where they are ruthlessly prioritizing the goals of the week and what they want to attend, what they want to do, and what they don't want to do. There's a line, and it's, hey, I got to do everything above the line. And it's like, once I do that, that's a successful week. If I can get more, bonus, right? But this is where I'm cutting the line. And so, a big part of that is prioritizing and sort of really picking, sort of which meetings, which processes, how you're going to spend your time, right? So that was problem space number one. Problem space number two, to help the first one, or this assumption I made in the second part, was it's a lot easier for a product person to iterate off of something existing than it is to ask them to create something brand new from scratch. So to really crystallize this for you, you think about a new initiative, and you're sitting down and it's a blank Google Docs window, and you're sitting there and you're like, I got to bang out this PRD. And you're like, what does this look like? How does this feel? We've all been there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where to start. You're pulling up previous examples. You're like, I didn't really like this. I know I got feedback from my dev lead on that. I got to change this up. So then what do? You open up a browser window and you're like, best PRD templates, right? And you spend time researching that. Oh, then your Slack goes off and you've got to, put out a mini fire that just hits you at that moment. You've spent 15 minutes of the hour that you allocated towards building this PRD, just really getting a first draft out of your brain and onto the screen, and you're still nowhere. That blinking cursor is still mocking you 15 minutes later. So what do? We cut bait. Listen, I'm not feeling the mojo. Now's not the right time. I got to move on to another task. This is where what we've done at LodeStone is we've integrated with the OpenAI APIs, and we've got a whole series of what we call document artifact generators. You take a given feature, and the minimum expectation that we have of the user is you should be able to briefly describe what that feature is about. The same way as if we were in office, sort of a colleague would walk by, they'd see on your desk a bunch of Post-it notes, and they'd point to a random thing. Google SSO, what's that? Oh, it's this. Take that snippet, put it in as your feature description, and from there, we're going to leverage the OpenAI API, and we're going to generate opportunity canvases, user stories, UAT test plans, user guide documentation, release notes, social posts and content, the whole plethora of documents and content that, depending on the size and scale of the organization you're at, either it's wholly looked upon as the product manager's duty to provide, or in some larger organizations, if you've got a product marketing function, they'll probably lean on your product marketing manager colleague to help provide some of that as well. But you can see, and sort of, I'm sure you've lived this experience yourself, a lot of that documentation, a lot of those artifacts, they still come back to the product manager to build. So this idea of, you just take that session that I just described, trying to spend the first 15 minutes of the hour building out that PRD, multiply that across and sort of replace PRD with UAT test plan, replace PRD with release notes or with user guide documentation. And so what we're saying is, we can help you get a first draft off the ground immediately based on the singular description you provide of that feature.
Yeah, no, in my craft, I do something very similar, and one of the first artifacts that my process and OpenAI tools built is just a persona. Do you understand your audience?
Yeah.
Because you cannot have any marketing or at all. You can't do anything in that space without first understanding who is your target audience specifically, and usually multiple personas into in B2B, a buying committee or different stakeholders. So it gets complicated just at the persona level really, really fast. So let's move to area 3. And I want to ask more of an open-ended question here, because now we're at that point where you've talked to people, you've built you've done all this work. And even if you use the artifact generator to help you get the first draft, that's great. So you've put in the hard work. you got past that frustrating first 15 minutes. The open-ended question I want to let you run with and do with is, you called this whole area revelations, because the human brain can do something that AI can't right now. It can do something that software can't do. It can do something that processes can't do. That's what I think about when I see revelations, because now I get to truly stop for a minute and do something. What is that something that I do
Yeah.
to have my revelations?
I think, sort of, I, 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 I chose the word revelations in this instance. Um, Again, it's helping make that leap from what you're doing today and the current dissatisfactions that you have with what you're doing today. Sort of, well, yeah, like, I'm building roadmaps, but, my stakeholders, my leadership team are forcing me to put timelines on roadmaps, and I'm not happy about it. How do you make that leap to, sort of the airy fairy, apple pie and motherhood statements that are out there to say, yes, roadmaps shouldn't have dates. They should be aspirational. How do you actually make that leap? And so, sort of, the roadmap revelations was really this, sort of section that spoke to, once you have all of this done, once you've been able to really articulate your bigger picture, your strategy, once you've gone through, to your point around sort of the product management prowess, and meeting with all the stakeholder groups, gathering all those inputs, once you've got that, it's time to package all of those findings. It's time to package all of that information into a story, into a narrative that, sort of people can get, sort of motivated by, people can get energized by, and really start to rally behind. Right. And so, it's this, section that really speaks to, um, the art of storytelling, and really saying, hey, you know, there's a lot of aspiration inherent within our jobs, especially when we're talking about road mapping. It's not just, let's, carve out some time for bug fixes, and let's make sure we do our UX audit, and let's do this. It's, hey, what are those bigger picture things? What are the aspirational goals that our leadership, sort of regularly talk about? And how do we, really demonstrate that over the next 90 days, your product and engineering team, we are materially marching towards the realization of those, sort of seemingly, airy fairy ominous goals that, sort of our leadership present to us every quarter. Right. So how do you actually make that a more realistic, a more tangible thing that people can reach for? Right. And it's really sort of that storytelling, sort of, muscle that I'm really sort of asking people to train and to really develop in that section.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you're touching on something that I could probably dive into for another whole hour with storytelling and how you like that. That's a thing all of it itself. Let's wrap up, Dennis. You have your background and expertise. You have the product offering through LodeStone. You have what I think is a fascinating project that you shared on, where I found it on LinkedIn, with the 31 lessons from 31 roadmaps in 31 days. Those are great ways that people could learn more about you. But if someone wanted to talk with you more, right, and just so we have it internally, what is it? What's your quick little pitch? Where do you want people to go? You know, LodeStone, absolutely. You've mentioned coaching. You're a good presenter and speaker. What do you look like? What is important to you for the next? What's on your 100-day plan?
Yeah, really, really, really great question. Um, if I had to really boil it down for you, Chuck, I would say, the next 100 days for me is really trying to amplify a lot of the efforts that I've been doing, on an individual one-on-one basis for the last, 5, 6 years. Right. And, sort of being able to, coach product leaders, product managers, individually, has been, immensely rewarding. But sort of just recognizing that, sort of there's a lot of connection, there's a lot of, resonance with, sort of the flavor, the opinion of product management that I have. There's a lot of connection that people have to that, and sort of saying, hey, can we amplify this? Can we do more than what I, as an individual person, would be able to, sort of physically do
Mhm.
one on one? And so I think sort of it's sort of the opportunity to do that through, sort of LodeStone as a platform. That's where we're looking, right? And really sort of on a go forward basis, it's the introduction of sort of more modules, more sort of these tools that really sort of continue to double down on sort of the whole reason why we wanted to do this in the first place, which is, hey, let's help you move faster. Let's help you get more done. And if we're successful in those two things, by virtue of the core element of your job, hopefully we help you be more successful in really achieving that organizational alignment that is so important to product management success.
Awesome. Dennis, thank you for your time today. I mean, I really appreciate it. This was great.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. This was fantastic.